and here you go.
Sweet. At some point, it will play.
Yeah.
Also, apologies, I'm slightly losing my voice. But as Ivo said, I'm Jason. I've traditionally given an Ignite talk about Dutch things, which is one of these slides.
And now you control me because even
Yeah. Apparently, we do want the year of the Linux desktop. It's because you have that fancy dock thing.
It's the dock thing.
It's a dock thing. And now it's like that issue, my problem. 50% right all the time. But thankfully it's plugged into USB-C, but it's 100% right.
How many engineers does it take to fix a
That's a good sign though. It's doing the whole
Yay! All right, and we're going. So auto-advancing. Yeah, I've been doing this for a while. I've given talks about Dutch culture and Dutch things because clearly you want an American on stage doing this. But for those of you who are new, welcome. So a few years ago at Devopsdays, they had a speaker dinner, and this is where the organizers and the speakers get together and we party, and we had it on a boat, which was amazing. And the boat sailed around the eye, which is the body of water that's just behind you. And there was this discussion of whether the eye is a river, or whether it's a lake, or whether it's something else. And as engineers, we are all very, very opinionated. And so people had strong opinions. And it became clear to me as I researched this that the eye has changed shape. Everybody was sort of right. This is the shape of the eye today. And it's clear that it's designed for shipping, right? We connect the IMER to the North-Sea. But almost 300 years ago, this is what the eye looked like. It didn't go out to the North Sea. Where Haarlem is a giant lake. It has changed over time, partly natural, but partly because Hollanders needed transportation. And all of this got me thinking, well, if the shape of the eye has changed, if we think about DevOps, what is the shape of DevOps, right? If we were to map it out, what would DevOps look like? Interesting question. So in order to answer this, we first need to answer, well, what is DevOps? John Willis is here somewhere. I don't see him. John, if you're here, wave your hand. But John and a guy named Damon Edwards helped run the first Devopsdays in the States. And they came up with this acronym called CAMS, Culture, Automation, Measurement, and Sharing. Jez Humble added Lean. So I like to call it clams. Some people call it calms, which is very soothing, but it doesn't actually work. So clams. And it works because it's clams because of this order. If you were to map this out, if you were to put each of these on an axis, well, then you can start to map DevOps, right? And as we grow, as we get stronger in each area, we can pull it out. And so the idea is to grow things. These are two organizations that I've worked at, the purple being Datadog. This is how I would map DevOps at Datadog, the things that we're strong in, the things that we need to work on. The orange is a different organization that I worked at, which I won't name names. But as we map this out, one of the things that I realized is the border around it is like an elastic band, right? Like if you have an elastic band and you're playing with your fingers, as you move out in one area, it releases the tension on adjacent axes, right? But it also increases the tension on the opposite side. And as I thought about this, it really explains why when we have companies that are like, you ask them what is DevOps, and they're like, oh, I'm running Jenkins, or I have this CI tooling. Well, you realize that if you pull out on automation, it's going to increase that tension. And I think this is why it explains that when people go all in on automation as DevOps, it becomes hard to establish good cultures of collaboration. It becomes hard to have that sharing. Or similarly, if you have a company that has a really strong culture, they get very entrenched in their processes. It makes it hard to be lean and to adapt and evolve those processes or to adopt the tooling. So my thought around DevOps is that you should work around the circle. If you are in one of those companies and DevOps to you means automation, well, automation makes getting metrics and measuring things easier. And once you measure those, you have information and you can share that. So you work around. Or you can go the other way. If you have those strong automation tools, they help you to be faster. You can be more agile. You can be lean. And that, again, feeds into culture and helps establish these cultures of collaboration. So as you start to think about DevOps within your organization, start to map it out. Think of where you're strong within these 5 areas. And then pick the adjacent areas. Those are the things that are going to become easier for you. Start investing in those areas. Now, with everything, you do need to always reevaluate, right? If you're thinking of mapping, things change. So constantly reevaluate within your organization. What are you working on? What are you becoming stronger in? As you become stronger, that changes the adjacent axes. And always, when you're changing, it's a natural process. Just like the changing of the eye, you're always going to have this dynamic movement. And that's a good thing. That means your DevOps is alive. That means you're actually working on things. So anyway, back to the eye. For those who have to know, the North Holland Waterways Bureau officially calls it a river. But as with all things, the eye will naturally change over time. So if you want to be safe, you can just call it the eye.
All right, now to my screensaver. Let's see here, who is up next? Who would like to go next? It's not gonna exit, there we go. Anton? Yes. Everyone ready? Yep. 1, 2, 3.
So yeah, this is my first slide. So let's talk about we have been doing something wrong. Okay, we've been doing something like Jason just mentioned, calling different things differently. I'd like to talk about how we can actually change our habits. And my name is Anton. I've been doing Terraform and AWS fanatism since 2015. And recently, AWS decided that they can call me a community hero. So thanks for that. Cloud architect. This is a pretty important role because they were doing pretty helpful work for quite a long time. They were helping people to actually bring their knowledge and help design and develop and actually be useful, right? But DevOps engineers, on the other hand, is actually doing pretty similar. And they actually all, like all stakeholders, all employees in the company should be willing to do the same things, but better, right? So they want to get faster conversion from idea of someone bright hat to real working project. And currently, cloud architects, they have a bunch of different tools where they can actually visualize the infrastructure, they can connect different components, they can visualize this in the browser. Cloudcraft is one of the projects which you probably saw before, and it's quite popular because people want to visualize their stuff. They want to know actually what's going on in the infrastructure, how it looks like. They can specify different properties. They can see how much will it cost, and they can actually export it as an image, right? But I mean, we are on Devopsdays conference where we should not help people to make strange things, right? So we actually believe that infrastructure as code makes DevOps possible. And if we let everybody to manage things in the browser and tell them that this is your best place to do, no, that's not right. We want everything to be as code, because only if it is in the code, then we can actually apply the same principles. We can run them. So cloud providers historically came up with different solutions. CloudFormation, Google Cloud Deployment Manager, but most of you know about Terraform. I mean, if you didn't, then it's my bad job. So Terraform allows us to describe infrastructure as a plain text file, where we specify what exactly we want to create. So like in this example, we specify that we want to create a S3 bucket, we specify different properties to it, and that's it. Over 4 years, I've been developing Terraform AWS modules used by lots of different people and downloaded several million times, because people don't want to invent the same stuff, how they set up their network infrastructure or how they use relational database services. But it's not actually still there. What I want is that we have AWS console where people actually see what they have created. And we have Cloudcraft where things look visual because this is how it was supposed to be. But then we have DevOps engineers who actually prefer to have things as code. So these three things are not actually one thing, it's three tools. So 3 distinct tools used for 3 different purposes. And a year ago, I started working on a project where I took visual diagrams, which Cloud Architect spent some time, and then I built on top of my Terraform AWS modules, which are actually building blocks of AWS infrastructure, and make it as open source. So now if you go to CloudCraft and you actually click export, then you will be using modules TF. So modules TF is open source, it's awesome, full of bugs, and there is demo. So yeah, I embedded bugs in unknown places, so if you find them, you'll get an Easter egg. So after this talk, I encourage you to try it, and every time when you try it, I will receive an error that something was not working. No, but honestly, it is a good way of bootstrapping, and actually a good place and good way of starting using and enforcing Terraform best practices, which I covered in some more details yesterday during workshop. And it enforces to keep segregation of duties between people who actually know AWS cloud provider, they are really Terraform developers, and your users. Typically, it's all kind of front-end and back-end developers. And as a summary of this one, I just want to highlight that it's very important to stay on shoulders of giants and use open source and use existing solutions, and don't try to make something using console, using click, drag and drop and so on. Please use everything as code. So thanks. And by the way, yeah, this is a website. Somebody asked me that TF, what is it? TF is Territory of France. Thanks.
Okay, Philipp. Yeah. You knew you were up for some reason, right? Okay. Let me know when you're ready.
Yeah. 3, 2, 1. Let's go. Hello, everyone. Who is a YAML engineer? Who likes writing YAML? Okay, you've come to the right talk, guys. So maybe we don't always like YAML, and I want to give you some arguments why. And obviously the title comes from the famous paper, Go-To Considered Harmful, and we kind of all agreed that Go-To is considered harmful. I'm not sure that YAML is really in exactly that place, or at least not yet, but there are some very tricky things. So why did we get to YAML in the first place? So we want to have something human readable, and that excludes XML for most of us at least. And normally we want to have comments as well, and that generally excludes JSON unless you have some dummy elements. White space sensitivity is something that's more of a matter of taste. Like the Python community will say this is the only way to do stuff, whereas C, Java, etc., they will always say this is an abomination and nobody should be doing that and rely on that. But this is just like where you want to go. So let's see some issues. Like here, does anybody know what will go wrong here? Like you have a port mapping in a YAML file, like Docker Compose, for example, and you want to expose port 20. Anybody knows what happens here? Yeah, you will get that result. And do you know why? Because if you have that one with below 60 and the colon in the middle, that's then considered base 60. And then that is why you get out of on this weird number, because this is considered base 60. So do quote that. This one is pretty obvious, and this is one of, I think, 22 values to write truthy or falsy values in YAML. And sooner or later, you will find one of the weird ones and run into that. So syntax highlighting can save you, but here you can see Norway might be unlucky in that example. The other ones are also kind of like, yeah, maybe you need to add quotes like null might evaluate to empty, or that tilde, which is also null, and probably you didn't mean to have version 1 dot a floating value for that. Generally, I think YAML as a data format is kind of defensible. Using YAML for templating or programming is not so much, because you have proper programming languages to do those. So keeping data there is okay. Everything else is kind of more questionable. I don't want to bash on GitLab, but they have this awesome bootstrapping example where they have 1,100 lines of YAML, which if you had that in code, you would already say like, yeah, that's a weird smell. But in YAML, it's okay. And then if you look at the actual code, you will see stuff like that, that you're actually calling out the shell script. And that's another 300 lines of shell script being run from a YAML file. And then you have the question like, why do you even add YAML just to have a shell script runner? Like shell scripts could do that naturally. having Helm templates, for example, when you need to do indentation, that's a very weird pattern to have this n indent, and then you kind of feel that something is going wrong here, like why do I have this pain? And also, if you change the indentation, nothing will be fixed anymore. So if you want to use a DSL, use a DSL, otherwise you will always run into limitations, and it's just the inflexibility, and then you need to have a shell script in the end again. And you have the bad of both worlds in the end. Or maybe JSON, it might be an interesting alternative. I've still not really made up my mind of that. It comes out of Google, but it's not officially like endorsed or done by Google, like it just happens to be done by folks from Google. But this is kind of trying to find the right mix of stuff. Looking at alternative data formats, like, does anybody like XML? One or two, okay. Yeah, tooling support and stuff is nice, but maybe it's not really made for human consumption. So XML is problematic. You could say like, hey, I want to use JSON instead, but you can see the visual noise, like all the curly braces and commas, and also like the first line to add a comment, you need this dummy element, which also just, doesn't feel right. For those who are like as old as XML, there is INI. Anybody still remembers that? And you can see the bottom lines, like you don't have any hierarchy, you need to kind of fake that. And also different INI parsers behave differently. For example, Windows ones are not case sensitive and you will run into all kinds of pain. Toml is kind of trying to fix that, but at the bottom you can see that indentation, for example, is just optional and this is just for human consumption and Toml doesn't require it. So it tries to fix some stuff, but still it doesn't really feel like it's the major win. And if you want to have the worst of all the worlds, IBM has you covered. Like, I hope they're not a sponsor. Yeah, that's it. Be safe when you write your YAML. Indent properly, quote everything, and that's it. And obviously, we use YAML internally as well. So we know that. Yeah, if you want to grab Elastic stickers, take them here. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. All right, so the last one and the last minute addition is Maddie. So Maddie presented this yesterday at the DevOps Enterprise Summit where the managers and thought leaders go to. I'm making fun of myself. Let's see here. I'm gonna.
Oh, you're like in the middle. You're giving away.
Cool. You're
Spoilers, man. Come on.
spoilers. Well, that's Adobe for you. And I can't use my.
Nobody look.
Everybody, close your eyes.
Learn everything, Evo.
Sorry.
Evo used to be my boss.
Yeah, long time ago. 1, 2.
1, 2, here we go, okay. So we hear a lot of things that people are postulating about DevOps, and the whole point is that it's pretty much all wrong except for what I'm gonna tell you because I know what's really happening with DevOps. So my goal here is to kind of talk about some of these myths. So the first thing is, the internet is a wonderful place to find information, but most of that information is super duper wrong. And so don't believe it. Just because it's on the internet doesn't mean it's true. In fact, if it's on the internet, it probably isn't true. This is something that was on the internet that is super true, right? So when we think about thought leaders, maybe it's not just putting words in random order, except that kind of might be what thought leadership really is. What I'm gonna try to do here is tell you about some common myths about DevOps and why they're not true. So one is, you may have heard people tell you that DevOps is more than just tools. This is a popular myth. People will tell you this all the time. It's super not true, and here's why. Because if it was more than just tools, why would we have so many of them? And you know, also, there are a lot of tools on DevOps Twitter. We got there. Okay, and Jason was just trying to tell us that, you know, DevOps is more than just automation. I'm sorry, sir, this is not true. You can try to sell this all day long, but this is super not true. And here's why. DevOps is not, because the A in columns is the only vowel. And vowels are more important than consonants because there's fewer of them. So therefore, automation is the most important one because it's the only vowel. This is just logic. Okay? So Kubernetes won't solve all your problems. People will tell you that. You know, we hear a lot about Kubernetes. There's been workshops about it. But people will say, no, it won't solve all your problems. This is also false. And here's why. It came from Google. And Docker is boring and it's old and busted. And also, as we know, YAML shows your commitment to precision. People will say in DevOps, you still need testing. And how many people here are testers? Okay, well, I'm sorry, that's not true. We don't need you. Here's why. Because if you remove the human element, you remove the human error. Also, and this is really key, if your microservice has an error, if a microservice only does one thing, it can't have an error because that's more than one thing. And microservices only do one thing. Now, you can't buy DevOps. You know, we hear this a lot. People say DevOps is not a thing that you can buy, right? It's a thing that you do. You can't buy it. Well, here's the truth about that. You may not be able to buy it, but I sure can sell it to you. I mean, seriously, I would love to sell you some DevOps. You know, what will it take for me to get you into a shiny DevOps today? This is what I want to know. DevOps is not a title. We fight about this on Twitter a lot. A lot of people will tell you it's not a title. There's no DevOps engineer. There's no DevOps. DevOps is not a title. This, you know, I've come to believe this is also a myth. And here is why. Because nobody can tell you what titles to use in your organization. Except maybe like your human resources, I guess they can. You know, that's kind of their job. But I mean, what do they know anyway? There's no human resources days. You know, they don't have a cool... People may tell you that you can do DevOps on Windows, right? This is, unfortunately, even though I've spent a lot of my life in the Microsoft ecosystem, this is really not true. You cannot DevOps on Windows, and here's why. Because a key component of DevOps is a smug sense of self-satisfaction, right? And Windows is click next bullshit, right? You know, and also something about /dot, and I don't know. So yeah, we saw Jan's talk before. He had a lot of cats. So a lot of people will tell you that cats are more aligned with DevOps than dogs. All good DevOps talks are full of cat gifs and everything. This is probably the most controversial statement, but I'm here to tell you that's not true. Because, I mean, look. He's really cute. I mean, and he's, well, you know, he's a dog. What does he know? At least he's not trying to run Linux on the desktop. You know. So, thank you for having me. Paigey says follow me on Twitter. Engage with my brand.
Thank you, Maddie. I'm going to unplug now, and it's your gig again.
Yes.